Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Tando Lamula, and I'm joining you from Durban, South Africa. I am the moderator for today's digital dialogue. For the benefit of participants who are blind or have a visual impairment, all speakers will begin with a brief self-description, starting with me. I am a Black African woman with short black dreadlocks tied into a bun. I have on small gold hoop earrings, red lipstick, and I'm wearing a white top. Digital Dialogues is a series of panel discussions exploring civil society perspectives on the emerging digital world. Migrants, regular and irregular, as well as refugees, are among the first victims of the newly emerging geopolitical situation. Today's dialogue will explore whether civil society has been able to put in place a digital counterpower providing effective support to migrants in the face of repression, pushbacks, and deportations. In recent years, CSOs have been providing digital support to migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. Digital support such as websites, mobile apps, and social media campaigns to provide up-to-date information on migration routes, legal procedures, and available services. At times, platforms offer information in multiple languages to cater to diverse migrant populations. Some organizations offer legal advice and administrative support through online consultations, helping migrants navigate complex bureaucratic processes. Digital tools are used to help individuals gather and submit necessary documents for asylum applications or visa processes. Digital platforms can also facilitate the creation of online communities where migrants and refugees share experiences, search for family members, seek advice, and find support, while CSOs use social media to raise awareness and do advocacy work. While nobody doubts the good intentions of CSO actors, the question has to be asked whether this has been enough. With governments leveraging digital tech to track, prevent, and deport migrants and refugees, what needs to and can be done to provide more effective support to these people? We have an excellent panel lined up, and I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Melita H. Sunjik, specialist in migration communication. She heads the Transcultural Campaigning, a Vienna-based agency advising governments and international organizations in communication with migrants and refugees. We also have Surabhi Srivastava. She's the Media Innovation Lead at RNW Media, an international digital media development organization in the Netherlands. Their extended bios will be dropped in the chat after each speaker has presented their opening input. To start us off today, each panelist will introduce themselves and frame the issue by sharing the current landscape and their key points for around 5 minutes, and then we'll have some discussions and questions.
Yes, thank you, Tando. Hello, everyone. I'm Surabhi. Just to start with self-description, I am Indian, brown-skinned woman. I wear glasses. I have reddish-brown shoulder-length hair. Today I'm wearing some gold earrings and an olive-colored dress. To start off, as Tando mentioned, I work with RNW Media, a media development organization that works internationally. We come to the issue of migration through the lens of digital and social media, and are trying to understand how do migration narratives and narratives about immigrants in the Netherlands are shaping public discourses on issues of migration in the Netherlands and beyond. If you're following what's happening in the Netherlands at the moment, given the collapse of the government, which has been over the issue of migration, we can assess how urgent and relevant this issue is. And of course, media plays a very important role, both print and digital and social media, in how these issues around who is a migrant, when do they become migrants, who is an asylum seeker, who is a refugee, how these discourses happen over time, how are they framed, and how are they used as persuasive tools for politics and for broader societal discussions. So I wanted to focus on three particular points. The role of digital and social media in shaping these narratives. So for instance, the idea of a good and a bad migrant. How do we understand and articulate these narratives and these stories of who is a good migrant, who is a bad migrant, who's a model migrant, and where do these narratives come from? At RNW Media, we are very interested in understanding how our social media platforms, whether it's Facebook, X, Twitter, or Instagram, and now TikTok, helping migrants themselves articulate their own stories and narratives of identity and belonging when it comes to talking about migrant identities. And we are also very interested in understanding beyond migrants themselves, who are the actors that are playing an important role in shaping these narratives and discourses. So for instance, are there political actors, the role of civil society, the role of film and culture in shaping ideas and shaping thought processes and shaping discourses about migration and about migrants in the Netherlands and beyond. This also includes, for instance, self-identity and self-perceptions, but also external perceptions that other actors bring to the idea of who is an immigrant, who is a model migrant, and who is a good versus who's an insider and who's an outsider. The second point that I wanted to raise is we are doing some very interesting research at the moment with University of Utrecht, the data school at University of Utrecht in particular, again, on understanding and unpacking these narratives. And part of the research includes actually looking at Dutch media publications going back over 20 years to understand how the narratives and storytelling around migration and migrants has changed over time in the Netherlands. In addition, we have also been interviewing migrant content creators who are creating content and sharing them on social media to challenge, to push the boundaries around what it means to be a migrant in the Netherlands. So for instance, we have heard stories where immigrants themselves are challenging these categories and perceptions around who is an immigrant, who's an expat, who is a refugee, who is an asylum seeker, who is an international student, and how all of these categories are negotiated and understood in everyday life, both by migrants themselves, but also by outsiders. This research is still ongoing, and we are just looking at very preliminary findings at the moment, but they're providing us some insights into how we can understand unpacking and also challenging these boundaries of these categories. We might understand these categories to be natural or to be fluent on their own, but it's quite interesting that migrants themselves are sort of preventing from falling into this narrative trap and challenging and negotiating these categories and understandings of what a migrant means in their everyday life. And this can include, for example, challenging the mundane narratives, like if they're a migrant here, does that mean they always have to be political? Perhaps not. They're interested more in understanding what it means to lead a good life in the Netherlands. What are the good restaurants to visit? What does it mean to celebrate festivals here? What does integration look like from their perspective? So we are really looking at a rich diversity of experiences that migrants bring through their social media content in this research. And the third point I wanted to bring in is the intersection of digital rights and immigration rights. Of course, because we look at digital and social media, we are looking at how migrants are also negotiating the spaces of, for example, censorship online. Are they self-censoring given the political and social climate around migration? Are they able to express themselves freely online when they are trying to talk about their experiences? What role does social media platforms play in censoring their voices? What role does the state or the government play in censoring migrants' voices online? So these are some, and of course, privacy and surveillance. Are they being surveilled as they lead their lives in online spaces? And how does that have implications in offline spaces? Those are some issues we're also trying to unpack and address through this ongoing research. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Surabi. You can unmute yourself, and I'd like to welcome Melita to please join me on screen. Please unmute yourself. and begin with the brief self-description.
Okay, so good afternoon. My name is Melita Šunjić, and I am maybe the older, or definitely the oldest person in the panel. I have worked for UNHCR for 25 years, and now I am dealing with migration issues in an agency called transcultural campaigning. I am, I am a white European woman with hair that is a bit below my ears and otherwise quite unremarkable, I think. Okay, I would start while Surabhi was looking at the issue from the angle of the receiving country, in that case the Netherlands, and many of her findings will be the same in most European countries. I have for many years now researched the digitalization of the whole process of irregular migration, and I would like to give you a very short overview. Who is using in this whole setup? Which players are using digital tools in which ways? And let's look at the migrants themselves. Let's look at the smugglers. Let's look at humanitarian organizations, international and private ones. And lastly, let's look at the destination country governments. And they all use digital tools in one way or another to help or to the detriment of migrants. The migrants themselves, pre-departure already, they try to get information, they try to find out how to go, where to go, how everything will play out, and what they can expect en route and when they arrive. They use it a lot during transit, and they use it, of course, upon arrival, and Surabhi has talked about that a little bit. It is maybe very important to know that who are the trusted sources? Who do they ask for information? And in this order, and I have done many studies on that issue, in this order of importance, first and foremost, it's friends and relatives. Maybe people who are already on their way, maybe people who have arrived in Europe or wherever it is they want to migrate to, and who share with them their experiences and their knowledge. So these are the sources they trust. Then next come fellow migrants from the same community, maybe people they don't know personally, but they met on Facebook or on other platforms. And these are people they would ask, how is it to come to the Netherlands? What do I expect on the Balkans route? How do I cross the Mediterranean, whatever. So they will turn to to people from the same ethnic background, from the same geographical region, because they have the feeling that, they see eye to eye with those and they trust them. And thirdly, smugglers. They will also, because these are usually their people from their own community, and they will listen to them. And then very, very low on this rating of credibility would come governments of all sorts of official institutionalized information. And also it's important that they usually don't go to websites to find information. They rather use social digital platforms, tools where they can interact in fora, where they can directly interact in closed messenger services and so on. So what else do they do? So that's before they leave, they get the information. Then en route, they need the phone in addition to stay in touch with fellow travelers, with their families at home, with people they know at destination. They use it for GPS orientation. So they have their maps downloaded and they know where to go, and where there are even maps to be had that indicate the best points to cross borders and so on. Also, they use it as their personal archive. All their documents, the photos of the family, all those things you want with your, you can, if you lose your clothes, you can buy new ones. But these irreplaceable things like documents, diplomas, whatever, and also photos are things that they use, that they keep on their phones, and they use it for banking services. The smugglers, the smuggling business has, since the arrival of digital networks, has turned from local service providers who help people cross borders, cross bodies of water, to really an international business, a multi-billion-dollar business worldwide, and sometimes extremely professional. I've seen some spots of Nigerian providers offering official flights to Latin America and then ways to the US, which at the moment might not be so current anymore. But extremely professionally done. It has completely transformed it into an industry. Humanitarian organizations, third player in the, it's not a game, but in this setup, they use tools for to provide information, to tell refugees and migrants where to go, where to turn, where to find help for search and rescue. But I think we have Khaled here who knows more than I about the details of this. And it's also a way, it's an inexpensive way for NGOs to reach a lot of people. And it's also a way to reach people who are in hiding, whom you cannot find. It's not long ago that we did a project for sub-Saharan refugees in Libya, and they are hiding, so they don't go to offices. They don't get to an UNHCR office or to an NGO office to find information. But on social media, we can reach them. We can tell them where to, for instance, phone numbers, where to call directly, and how to get in touch, and how to learn what they need to know. And also, as a consequence, when you work in the field of migration, I've been on a lot of operations in the field. The first thing people ask for when they arrive is there a Wi-Fi? Because this mobile phone is such a valuable, vital tool. And then let's look at the governments. There is, of course, let's start with the positive things. There are websites where you can find information on how to place your asylum application and where to go and so on. But they use it for much more. And I have seen that along the Balkan route, in any pushback that happens, the border guards seize the phones and either destroy them or they just seize them and don't give them back. So because they know how valuable it is for the migrants, they take hold of it. Also, what governments increasingly do is extracting data from the mobile phones to check and recheck whether whether they can see geographically where have they moved around, who are they in touch with, what are their contacts, and so on. Legally, this is very shady business, and I know that it has been banned by in Germany, for instance, by a court who confirmed that this is too intrusive and cannot be used unless there is another way to confirm the data. And the same is true for Austria. I don't know about other countries, but it's not in line with European legal standards. And then what governments also do, they use digital tools for deterrence campaigns. Say, don't come to our country, we don't like you, you will not get asylum, you will not get social support, and so on. But luckily, nearly no one sees these campaigns. So their effect is very, very limited. So that would be the 4 players in the setup and how they use digital tools. And believe me, I know what a difference it makes because I've been in the refugee and humanitarian work so long, and I know how it looked before and after digitalization.
Thank you so much, Melita. We will now move on to the second part of today's dialogue and provide our speakers the opportunity to ask each other questions based on each of their opening inputs. I'd like to invite Surabi and Melita to turn their cameras back on and ask each other questions to tease out the relationships and intersections in the current landscape and in each other's work. We've heard from Surabi, we've heard from Melita, from the basics of terminology around migration and migrants, the different types of migrants, what a good migrant is, what a bad migrant is, some of the narratives that are driven, as well as on social media and other digital platforms. And Melita's sort of taken us through the different types of players and each of the digital tools that they use, and perhaps to a certain extent, the role of digital tools in a migrant's journey as well. Are there any questions? Perhaps Surabi, we can go back to you on any questions.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think it was very enlightening, both from Melita and Khalid, to hear about their work and also personal experiences. I had a question for Khalid, especially around, because you talked a bit about your own experience of using social media as a migrant in Germany. And I was wondering, because it's something we also asked migrants in our interviews, did you ever feel the pressure to adhere to a certain narrative online, or an image that people often perceive of what it means to be a migrant in a foreign country, but also specifically for you as a Syrian migrant in Germany, given the sociopolitical context there? So I think it would be very interesting to hear from you. And how did you challenge those narratives in your own presence online? And for Melita, I think I was very interested to also understand how migrants negotiate this use of digital tools versus privacy issues. So you mentioned that they also carry a lot of documents on these digital tools, right? Saved as passports or photos. How does that relate to both surveillance and privacy issues that they encounter throughout their journeys to the destination countries?
Okay, your question is very good. Thank you, Surabi. Digital tools and privacy. In my experience, and maybe Khaled having experienced that himself and with his fellow refugees, can even say more about that. But in my experience, there is not much. There is not much awareness about privacy issues. People talk quite openly. Sometimes it is closed dialogue groups, but it's quite easy to enter such groups under fake names and listen in. So I have the feeling that people are really exposing themselves quite a lot. And this is why mobile phones are so interesting for governments and police.
Thank you so much. Melita, I think you also had some questions.
Okay, yes, thank you. Surabi, one question, one technical question for me as a researcher. You said that you are researching how refugees and migrants present themselves and whether there's some kind of self-censorship in the way they present themselves on the media. And my question is, are you looking at self-representation in Dutch, or are you looking in the languages of the migrants? Because you might find two very different worlds there. Then instead of a question, I will just add, maybe to understand how sea and rescue works. People who enter boats in Tunisia or Libya get a digital a satellite phone, usually from the, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that was that's sort of my last knowledge, which is a few years ago, and these things change, because when you are in the middle of the sea, you don't have reception, so you cannot use your digital phones. So what the smugglers give them is a satellite phone that only contains a map where they need to go, so that they have GPS, that they know how to navigate, and the numbers of rescue organizations. So in case they are in distress, they know who to call for help. And for me, this underlines the how important digital tools are in the whole migration process, and where normal digital coverage isn't available, the system even resorts to satellite phones in order to keep people connected. And
Thanks, Melita, for the question. I think, yeah, it's a really important question. I'm glad you highlighted that. So while the quantitative part of our study is looking at Dutch publications, so that language is particularly Dutch, the qualitative part of the study, where we are interviewing migrants, it really actually depends on which language they create their content in, right? And we are finding that a lot of them create content which is in their native language. So if they have moved here from the Philippines or from Indonesia, then they are actually talking to people in their own language, because they actually see a following from the Philippines or from Indonesia, for instance. But they are also engaging in English oftentimes. And then when they are getting comments in Dutch from online audiences that are following them, I think they're also trying to engage a little bit in Dutch, which also is a marker to show that, you know, I'm here in the Netherlands, I'm learning the language, and I'm engaging with that language. So yeah, it's very important, but I think bulk of the content that we are seeing is really in the language that they're most comfortable with, which is usually their native language. And also because most of their following online is from their home countries.
okay, thank you.
I also have a question, if I may, to Surabi. Could you also elaborate on this? I don't know if you have any finding yet, but this is very interesting also in terms of the representation. Could you elaborate on it from the Dutch perspective, at least?
So at this point, we are still very much going through data analysis, so I cannot share much. But I think from the Dutch perspective, what I would say is, at least from the perspective of the content creators that we have been interviewing, most of it actually has been quite positive response. So they do find that they have online Dutch audience that are also interested in knowing about their culture, about, you know, their own experience in the Netherlands, and have also been quite helpful. But of course, there are also instances where they have faced backlash. So for example, if they have spoken out about certain Dutch policy on migration, or if they have highlighted certain issues with bureaucracy, then they've also heard instances of, you know, negative comments or backlash. But to be very honest, we haven't seen that as much. There has been much more solidarity and support, at least in the view of content creators and how their content is being received by Dutch audiences. But this might be very different when we start looking at the narratives in Dutch publications and the coverage and the response to that news coverage. So that might be very different, but at this point, we haven't analyzed it fully for me to share those findings.
Thank you so much. So we're going to move on to the next, the last part of our session today, which is questions from the Zoom chat. And I have one here. The question is from Suiba in the Zoom chat. The discussion here is enlightening, but raises a more fundamental question. We have recently seen countries, mostly in Europe and the Americas, attempt to reach an understanding with other countries to serve as holding grounds for immigrants. Between such countries as did happen between Rwanda and the United Kingdom, which country would bear the primary obligation to ensure that such immigrants enjoy their internationally recognized rights and fundamental freedoms, including access to digital services. The question is a two-parter. It goes on to say, do such arrangements take into account the human rights situation in the holding country so that immigrants do not find themselves in an equally or even more hostile environment than the one they escaped from?
I can answer, if that's okay for you, Sorabi. Well, yes, it is not only in my personal view, it's impossible to guarantee the standards, the humanitarian, the legal standards, the standards of living in third countries. In that case, I'm looking at the EU. I'm not so familiar with the Americas current situation. I haven't been there. I haven't researched it. We had two cases, points in case. One is Rwanda, the other is Albania, where Rwanda was with the UK and Albania was with Italy, who tried to first get all asylum seekers there and have all asylum applications processed there, and built a huge center which is completely useless now, and because it's empty. The courts did not allow, as did the courts in the UK, did not allow the government to transfer a problem to a third country. It is their duty. It's legally, it's also quite clear, it's the duty of the country where the asylum claim was submitted. And it is not legally, maybe politically, some parties would like that, some governments would like that, but legally it's not possible because the same humanitarian legal standards cannot be guaranteed in third countries.
And if I may add to that, I'm not going to engage with the policy part of, or even the politics of it, but I think if we step back and try and understand why are these policies even coming into place, right? Or why are they being even thought of? I think we have to step back and think about, again, going back to what are the narratives and framings that are enabling such policies to be shaped? What are the elements that are making us believe that we are supposed to now hold migrants in a third country, right? And what does it say about dehumanization of a whole group of people? So I think for me, it's very interesting, again, from a media perspective, to think about how are the narratives and discourses kind of leading up to such policy discussions and then actually them ongoing to be implemented, which is, for me, quite against human rights charters that we believe in.
Thank you so much, Sorabi and Melita. We have another question from the Zoom chat from Tony. What is interesting is that the word migrant seems to have a color, and framing seems to depend on where they are from or where they are going. We know the reactions to the plight of European refugees, and the accommodations made across the world have been reported very differently to the reaction to equally desperate refugees from other parts of the world. Was the framing, Khalid, described used for all refugees, for example, Ukrainians fleeing war in their country? And what is the impact on the type of information collected about the refugees and how they interact with different avenues?
There are, if we look at the legal side, there is a very strict definition who is a migrant, who is an asylum seeker, who is a refugee, and who is a war refugee, like the Ukrainians, which is a different category, without going into the legal details, but they are legally treated differently. Okay. But migrant always has, and I agree with the person who asked the question, migrant always has some kind of connotation, some underlining negative meaning. And I will start with a little anecdote. Years ago, as I told you already, I worked for UNHCR, and I don't know how we started this discussion. We were both, a colleague of mine and myself, were both living for more than a year in a different country and working there, which is the classical definition of migrant is a person who voluntarily lives in another country for reasons of family, of education, of work. So we were migrants, and I said, but we are migrants. And she said, no, we are expats, because expats are white people in a superior position, and migrants are people who come with economic problems and whom we don't like very much. So I agree completely that this narrative plays a role, and it has an undercurrent in how language is being used. So this is why I think it's really very important to look also at these questions that Surabi is dealing with narrative, with more and more right-wing parties, openly racist, openly xenophobic. It is necessary to see how we are using different words. Migrant in itself should be a completely neutral term, saying I live in a country because I work there, or I got married, or I'm studying there. I live in a country that is not my country of origin, and should have no other meanings. But that is theory. In practice, it has a negative undertone.
Thank you so much, Melita. We do have to wrap up.
Oh, sorry.
Perhaps
I wanted to ask if I can just like one quick point.
Final comment, absolutely.
Yeah, I wanted to just highlight that to what Khalid was saying, that we're doing a similar subset of the research looking at the Dutch narratives on attitudes towards Syrian migrants versus Ukrainian migrants that came here. So yeah, that's still, I think we're doing kind of similar research to understand how they differed in terms of the public consciousness. But also to what Melita was saying, I think in addition to the perceptions from outsiders of how migrants are perceived, there's also, as Melita was mentioning through an anecdote, this is the self-stigmatization as well. I am not a migrant, I'm an expat. I think I've been hearing that recurringly in the interviews that I've done. So it's very important to also identify that's not, and recognize it's not just from the outside perspective, but also very internal to how we as migrants internalize some of these stigmatizations.
Thank you so much, Surabi, Melita, for a wonderful and insightful discussion, as well as to our sign language interpreters and our captioner for their tireless work throughout today's session. Thank you all for joining and for your engagement.